I'm Eric Nason with Newsshooter.com, and it is the final day of NAB 2018, and we're going to do a little bit of a discussion here at the AbelCine booth. So I'm joined with Jeff from AbelCine, I'm joined with Jem, and I'm joined with Matt. We have a great panel, and we're just going to discuss, well, what we saw, what we liked, and maybe what makes our life a little bit easier as well. So why don't we just start off with, what do you guys think of the energy of the show? I thought it was a pretty energetic show. I think people were really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I would say the crowd felt like it was less people here perhaps, but I'd definitely say the conversations we've had with clients, people just walking by, was definitely on a higher level. So maybe it's more quality over the quantity, which, you know, as a company we definitely appreciate, but just as individually, like just not having to deal with a lot of, you know, kind of random questions is spectacular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think it's a few years ago, it was a lot of people figuring things out. And I think people have figured stuff out now, and they're just looking for the right product for what they're doing. And I'm not talking about the broadcast industry. I'm talking about young filmmakers, in-house production. You know, there's been a lot of stuff that's been very new in the industry over the last few years, and now we're just starting to see sort of improvements on things and then evolution of things. So I think people were, you know, sort of talking about real stuff, and no tire kickers, very few.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in some ways I think you know, a lot of people now are coming here because they're seeing things that are being pre-released, and they're more interested in turning up and then going straight to that booth. And I think maybe that's probably why attendances are maybe a little bit lower than they used to be. But I think that's probably a good thing, because you don't get people sort of coming here and endlessly walking around and then coming up and asking, is this new, is that new? You know, they know what they want to see, and they come here and they go straight to the booth.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a good point too, because I think this year more, and maybe more so every year, but the pre-releases are just fast and furious. I mean, it was really only the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K was really the big release, and the FS5 Mark II were really the two big camera releases at the show, that's kind of rare. It's a very low number of cameras, or just new products that are being shown. But we'll get to cameras in a minute. Let's jump right over to lighting, because I think I'm seeing a lot of RGBW, RGB, just a ton of different soft sources, boxes, you name it. What are you guys seeing that impressed you, and maybe, I don't know, maybe not so impressed, but let's keep it positive, right? Jeff, go ahead. What do you think?
Well, I think to your point, it's all about RGBW. It's all about control. Having that one or two tools in your kit that doesn't require a whole series of you know, light sources, light styles. I think, you know, being able to adapt them. One of the things I saw that I really liked was the expansion of the Hive 100C family with the 50C and the 200C. Being able to have a larger unit for, you know, more output, or a smaller unit for on-camera type use, but have the full RGB control, specialty effects they're demoing as well. So I think that's sort of the trend that we're seeing now. Is definitely going to be along those avenues.
Joe?
When the three of us sat down at Cine Gear last year, and that's coming up fast, and we'll probably be doing it again in, you know, 6 to 8 weeks. I kind of said that this was the year of RGB LEDs. I was off by a year because we had fixtures, but this is really sort of the coming out party in terms of that. So we're seeing a lot of different form factors for LEDs. I mean, obviously we're seeing our standard 1x1 type form factor, but we're seeing other form factors that are existing, and different combinations. It's not always RGBW. We're seeing RGBAW, so we've got amber in there. Some people are putting tungsten, they're putting daylight, and then they're putting RGB. So they've all got their little formulas. And to talk to Hive, they've got this sort of, they're unique in the sense that they have these 5 different colored LEDs that they're creating their white light and their colors from. But for me, the most exciting thing, I think, is that we're now seeing manufacturers who are starting to figure out, Hive being sort of the first one with that little adapter with the Mini Source 4 that you could put onto the 100. But now we're seeing companies creating LECO style solutions for their lights. We saw the one from Aperture. Yes, I saw it for the first time yesterday, and that gets me really excited, because, you know, these LED lights are not dados. They are old dados, you know, with the type of quartz halogen bulb, and we could get that point source. And even though the LED dados are interesting, we need a different solution. So I think seeing these LECOs and these other modifiers starting to come out, they're starting to figure out lensing solutions. I've had conversations with companies about that. I'm excited about that kind of stuff as well.
Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, we're seeing a lot more fixtures that are becoming multi-versatile. So, you know, the end user's becoming smarter. They want more out of a product. They don't want to just buy this light that does this process, this light that does this process. They want something that can do it all. That's sort of something that we're seeing a lot of, as you mentioned, with attachments, and people want to get a light that can do this job, and this job, all from that one fixture. And the other thing I think that's exciting is we're seeing a lot more firmware updates for lights these days. So the Sky panels, the light panels, Gemini, for instance, they're constantly evolving these lights. So for the end user, if you're buying a product, you're constantly getting new features. This was something that used to only sort of take place with cameras in the last few years. Now we're seeing it being integrated into lighting.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting what we're seeing with that. I mean, the new Sky Panel, firmware 4.0, it's adding a lot of additional. The hardware's the same, and they just keep adding functionality to the lights. Yeah.
One thing you mentioned this, Matt, on our preview, is we're kind of taking a step back because of RGB lighting. Now they're going to have to really master it, make it clean, because we have to have clean white light. I mean, it's nice to be able to have one fixture that does it all, instead of having to drag out a bunch of different fixtures when you want clean white light as well as colors. Now the output's going to drop because they're adding that extra LED that might not be used, but you did mention now in the Hive light, they're kind of combining those lights to create white light. So do you think that as we take that step back, as manufacturers take that step back, that output is going to become somewhat of an issue again, and that we have to move forward with that? Or
the heat and the size is the biggest problem with RGB, because it requires so much more power. They need to dispense that heat. So a lot of the RGB fixtures we're seeing are a lot heavier than traditional normal LED fixtures, and that's something that's sort of maybe they're going to work for in the future in getting the weight down of these things, or getting better cooling in these fixtures, because the biggest problem is for a lot of us is that you're getting you want this fixture, but then you go and pick it up and you find that it's 6 or 7 kilos, and that's something that probably needs to come down, and that's probably one of those steps that, as you talked about, in the evolution of RGB.
And actually, to your point about accuracy or output versus all these specialty effects, I like what Aries doing on their Sky panels. There's in the menus, it'll actually give the option more accurate or more output, right? So they are, looking at photometrics and understanding, okay, if you need really accurate, you have your Sekonic meter out and you're trying to read what the photometrics look like, put it in that mode. But if you need just raw output and you don't mind slight inconsistencies or slight shifts perhaps, then you flip it over to that mode instead. So I think that's one way of kind of combating that issue, like you mentioned. The light fixture itself only has so much room for little diodes. Power and weight is another big consideration, but they're kind of doing the way to maximize both, I think.
And we dealt with that when when manufacturers were going to bicolor. It was that same thing. It's like, okay, how do the lights are going to, you want both colors? You're going to have to sacrifice output. They started to figure that out by combining those two LEDs to make white light. So it's a fixable issue. They just have to engineer these things. Anything you saw in the RGB world that's more affordable for the indie filmmaker? You see anything that's kind of a value? Because like light panels and Aries, the Sky panels, they're super expensive. Probably a lot of people are going to rent them unless you really have good budgets. Did you see anything that you thought was affordable and a good entry point for the indie filmmaker?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I've actually been using the little Luxley 5-inch light for quite some time. I have it in all my workshops because I say to people, for $250, you've got a color tunable light. You can use it, put a neutral gray background there, and you can make that background anything you want. And so they've come out with another light that I find really interesting. It's this 10-inch, but it's really skinny and it's long. They're doing RGB AW, and I really appreciate their menu design too. I think that I loved it on the original light. It just it just shows you see exactly what you're getting.
And all app based, you can change everything off the app there. Runs off a Sony MP battery, and I think it was this light was. I was surprised because I think it's a Norwegian company, and they said, "Oh, this is being made in Norway," and so I expected the guy to say, "Oh, this is $1,500," and he said $399.
The genesis of that light, to my understanding, is coming from that company that used to make that little light that goes onto your smartphone, and it snapped into it, and they had an app, which was not very good. But the lights are exciting for people, and then of course we're seeing some other lights from some other companies out there like Aperture that are affordable solutions. The writing's on the wall. We know where Aperture goes, and they will serve the market and what they want, and they very much are about the young filmmaker and the budget conscious person, but they're also figuring out how to make a unit the same size but with higher output. And so I think there's going to be a lot of solutions. I mean, the sky panels are the benchmark. They're the thing that everybody looks at in terms of mid to high end production. You can rent them reasonably, and if you want to buy them, you just have to know those suckers are going to be working. But they have weight, and there's other considerations there. So we have to have all of these other options in the market.
I think the other thing we're seeing too, and you've probably seen this as well, Jem, is that we used to see tons and tons of 1x1 panels. Now we're starting to see a lot more 2x1, 3x1 style panels, which I think personally makes for a better light, because you can control it more, you can use it for more purposes. Is that something you think going forward we're going to see a lot more of? A lot more companies getting into 2x1, 3x1, etc.?
So. Yeah, I mean, at least 2x2s, and being able to roll them up, or now we're seeing smart ways that you can fold them up, so that their form factor when they go in a bag is a 1x1, and you open them up and it's a 2x2. Yeah. The larger I can have my source point, the less I have to modify it. Maybe I only have to diffuse it or whatever, but I really like. But I love hard light as well. The hard light sources for me, they can work really, really hard in terms of, no pun intended, in terms of being able to be used in many different ways. Because I can always take a hard light and push it through a 6x6 or a 4x4 and make it into something else.
Yeah. I was really excited about Intelitech. They have an LC160 RGB model. And that's similar to the design what you were just mentioning. It's a 2x2 panel. It's nice and broad, but it folds down into one size panel. And that's amazing. I mean, it's really great, and it's all battery powered. Battery powered lighting has become huge. You don't have to plug these things in the wall anymore. You get a good hour on some of these if it's like a 160 watt draw, right? You get a 150 watt battery. You're running around with 3 batteries, and you could have cinematic lighting in the middle of a forest. That's pretty powerful, right? No generator allowed.
Yeah, it's great. Now, in terms of the camera side, and then we get to talk. Now we're talking about these choices that we have. We're starting to go wide gamut, right? So we're moving into P3 and Rec 2020, and so these RGB units are really interesting from that standpoint too, because I think creatively, when we go into these wider gamuts, now we're going to be able to, and it's all going to be a dance in terms of getting to be accurate and everything else. But we're in this learning process because we're finally starting to get monitors in the market that are letting us see full P3. They're going into the 2020 gamut. So we're going to start to make different choices, and we're now getting the tools in lighting to do that, regardless of whether it's a full format camera, Super 35, or it's a micro 4/3. There's just a lot of choices out there right now.
Real nice. Anything else about lighting you guys want to touch on?
I think Jem was going to show something that he
I think
found.
I'm saving this for the favorites.
Oh, you're saving it for
the favorites?
Yeah.
Jem and I, we both like that one. All right, let's move forward. That was actually a great bridge over to cameras. Let's talk a little about cameras. It wasn't a big release, so I think the overall interest is full frame cinema cameras. We're seeing a lot now. They're all out there. What do you guys think about the new breed of full frame cinema cameras?
I mean, I think you have a point. It's a new breed. It doesn't necessarily replace or overtake the existing cameras. I think that's one thing that maybe even like our messaging may lead people to think. I don't think that's the case at all. 35, 16 is still very valid, still very popular formats for good reason. But I do think the interesting aspect of full frame cameras is not necessarily the resolution, because we've had multi-K cameras for a while now. Honestly, I think it's really about the look, the depth. It gives the creatives a different option when it comes to how they set up a shot and kind of the cinematic quality. And some really beautiful show reels that people are showing, which really highlight the usage of that shallow depth of field. So again, I think it's like a different cadence or different feel to it using the larger format cameras. Again, with the main 4, there's a lot of choices in all different price points, and they're all Netflix already and all approved for the OTT style broadcasters.
Netflix. That's what it seems like. Every camera is designed for one specific purpose now. Boy, do they have that much of a strangle on us? That's really nuts, right?
When they have that much money on the line, I think that's what is it, $700 billion between the 3-4 big players.
Yeah.
So
it's pretty crazy. Jem.
Well, I guess we just talk about lenses in relation to that. Obviously, there are solutions when you look at an Alexa LF that they're looking at creating new lenses for that camera and the design of that sensor and everything else. But then there's the other point, which is that if you've been using, let's say, CP3s other full frame lenses, and you've been using them on super 35 millimeter, sensor based cameras, you're now using that same lens, but you're getting the full coverage of that lens. So, that's a big deal, because it starts to have you use that lens a different way. Now, this is nothing new even to the lower end of the market, because people are running around with A7 series cameras. Some people are still shooting on full frame DSLRs. So it's not like we're dealing with something that's a brand new look.
We all did it with the 5D.
We all did it with the 5D. And so, now we're just starting to see that. I think that the resolution game is sort of starting to settle down. We know where we're going with BT2100. That's sort of settled to where it is. So now the manufacturers have to say, okay, so what's the next thing here? And it seems to be that we're going into full format in terms of that. We call it full format, I guess, or full frame. It could be either one. Large format.
Many different ways.
Yeah, everybody has their own thing. Yeah.
I think it's important that we're seeing a lot of these cameras coming out now that can change down from full frame to Super 35 or S16 or all these different modes. I think because that's important, because I don't think everyone's just going to suddenly jump out and start shooting on full frame cameras. That's not really going to happen. I was having a conversation with Ari, and they said, look, we don't really expect all our existing Alexa users to suddenly jump on the LF. It's just another tool in the arsenal. People are going to continue to still use the SXT. They're going to continue to use the Mini, and just I think for the higher end, big blockbuster cinematic, masterpiece movies, maybe they'll go for full frame. And we're also seeing a few companies now sort of trying to get in at the bottom end, making full frame cameras. Kin Affinity, the Chinese company.
Yeah.
Bought out one, which is pretty impressive for the price point, I think. I mean, I haven't actually shot with it, so I can't say what the quality's like. But it'll be interesting to see if more cameras down to that level start coming out in full frame. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think focus pullers are going to be weeded out, because only the good ones are going to rise to the top if we're shooting in full frame, and you want to start getting super shallow depth of field. That's going to be a premium position on a film set.
Well, I think that'll be sort of our next area. We're starting to get displays that let us see wider gamuts and more of what the cameras are capturing. But I'm assuming that in the relatively near future, we're going to start to see more UHD resolution monitors, because that's really one of the biggest challenges that we have. It's not necessarily that it's impossible to pull focus or to keep focus. It's that we're looking at a 4K image on a tiny little HD screen, and everything's going to basically look like it's tack sharp.
Yeah.
And so it's having, and nobody wants to reach over to a monitor and do a 2:1 or a 4x magnification when they're shooting. Rather see a 1-to-1 pixel representation, or at least close to what we're doing. So I'm really hoping that we're going to start to see higher resolution screens, because it's all these ingredients that come together that make it possible for us to effectively use things like a full frame, large format camera system. And it's a huge challenge when you're looking at a 3.5-inch, 4-inch screen.
Yeah, good point. Okay, another thing that's kind of like the most unsexy thing to talk about, other than a tripod. No, I'm kidding. It's a codec. Out from nowhere comes Apple ProRes RAW. What do you guys think? I mean, I personally think this is an exciting time to have a really solid RAW workflow that's not going to require a $10,000 computer or transcoding. Jeff, what do you think of this new ProRes RAW?
I mean, it's interesting. I think right now, wide marketplace is the big issue, personally. As we know, it's Final Cut 10 only. For now, so we don't know what Apple's release schedule is and when they'll start licensing it out to the other players. But I think once that happens, then it really kind of jumpstarts the whole idea. And I love what Atomos is doing with the recorders, because you take, your FS5s, your C200s, your EVO 1s, and you're taking these cameras and you're kind of upping the game to a known, I think we talked about this, to a known codec, and you're not mixing formats and worrying about whether your machine will play out certain things. At the DJI booth, they were showing, admittedly it's an expensive computer, it's an iMac Pro, but they're showing iMac Pro on the timeline that must have had at least like 8 or 9 different Apple ProRes RAW streams, clips, and it was playing back just butter smooth. So I think the performance is there, and again, for me personally, it's about getting the wide marketplace acceptability from the editing and the NLE platforms.
Yeah, I think it's really that format's adoption is what Jeff is saying. we've got to see it in DaVinci Resolve. We've got to see it in Premiere Pro. The adoption of it into different camera systems, but a lot of it is the NLE, because as long as there are external recorders, and of course Atomos is the one that's sort of leading the march on this, and we can get that signal out of a C300 Mark II or an EVA 1 and these other cameras, a raw signal to go to a raw format. If we can get that into these different solutions in post, then it makes it a viable solution. Right now, with it only being Final Cut, I do happen to be a Final Cut user, but with it only being Final Cut, I think we're very, very limited. So we're in early days here. I think we'll know very quickly, within 12 months, by NAB next year, whether or not ProRes RAW is going to be adopted widely in the industry, because there's going to be a lot of decisions made after this show by a lot of camera companies, and there's going to be a lot of discussions with software manufacturers who are making NLEs and grading solutions. So we're going to really have to see where it goes. But I'm excited about it. I think the potential of it is very, very high.
Yeah, I think for some of the big players, in the industry who are making cameras who do have ProRes recording on board, I think they're not going to implement ProRes RAW until it is absolutely supported by all these different NLEs and different software solutions, because, as you said, otherwise it's very limiting. No one wants to put a format in their camera that forces you to use one particular brand or product to then process or deal with that.
No, ARRI's not going to put it in there while they have ARRI RAW until they know that can get into, as you said, all of those solutions.
Yeah, and I don't think ProRes RAW has come along to be like take over every single other RAW format. Every RAW format has their own place.
Totally.
And people at a certain level are still going to be using proprietary RAW codecs from various different companies. I think the exciting thing for middle ground users, cameras like the C300 Mark II, FS7, EVA 1, things like that, is it now gives you that opportunity for people who are maybe not familiar with the whole sort of RAW post-processing and workflow to be able to take, get the benefits of RAW. I don't want to sound like a ProRes spokesman here, the benefits of RAW with the ease of ProRes. It's literally like that. Being able to take that material, shoot it, turn it around, put it in, don't have to do anything with it. Well, you still got to do something with it. And then get it out is, I think exciting for those sort of people. It gives them a sort of a bridge, I think, to then working on maybe higher end cameras with proprietary RAW formats.
Yeah, I think actually you mentioned ARRI at RAW, and it's interesting because ARRI has said that they are keeping a very close look, or keep a close eye, I should say, at how ProRes RAW develops. So they're not immediately dismissing, which I thought they would. They're like, no, our format's better, we know our camera's better, we'll adapt ours, and maybe just have the regular ProRes. But yeah, they told us in a meeting that they are very seriously looking at where ProRes RAW goes. So I think that's pretty compelling when you have a company like ARRI taking that close of a look at it.
It would just be wonderful to have that one codec in your camera. We all have. I'm not a big fan of recorders. There's that cable thing scares me all the time. I always, so you always want to have a backup. But the idea of having, we need monitors anyway on set, so I get that part. But just having that universal codec goes right out of the camera. It's high quality. Goes right into your edit. Oh man, freedom. All right, we're gonna go a little bit freestyle now. Let's talk a little bit about anything you want. Audio, lighting, anything you saw that just tickled your fancy, make your life easier. Jeff, what do you think?
I mean, as far as making lives easier, I think what the Creative Solutions Group is doing is very interesting, right? Creative Solutions owns all these sub-brands like Teradek, Small HD, Wooden Camera, etc. Obviously part of the bigger Vitek family. But it's interesting that they're taking these brands and these properties and the technologies and integrating them into a unified product. So I want to say one of my favorite things that I saw was not just like the Small HD focus with the built-in Teradek receiver or transmitter, which I think is very clever, but also the fact that they were showing a prototype. Admittedly, it was cobbled together, from my understanding, basically in a hotel room, but a cobbled together RT Motion hand controller that integrates with the Small HD and the Teradek, so you're actually getting the overlays of your focus scale directly on the screen. And not only that, you can actually control the RT Motion from the touchscreen itself. So if you want to turn certain things off, you want to map the lens, you just have to calibrate, you can all do that from the screen as well. And they had a really beautiful handheld configuration, which is no bigger than this microphone, which I thought was really, really clever. So I'm happy to see that kind of integration between all their brands.
Jim?
I guess two things. One is just camera control. So we're seeing, again, benchmark master grips from ARRI. But then there are some solutions I'm starting to see. One of them is actually here in the booth, which is the Cameo Grip, and being able to control different camera systems with that at a product that's well under $1,000. I know it's not finalized, but I really like what I'm seeing there. And then I was over at the Atomos booth yesterday, and I saw what I thought was just a director's monitor, and then there were 2 handles on there, and it was this Tilta solution with 2 lens gears. You can just camera control there, and the whole kit is $1,200. Now I don't know a lot about it yet, but I saw it and I went over to the booth and I said I'm coming back there today to find out a little bit, because again we have this small to no crew production market, and they're not going to go into an Alexa, and they're not going to go into master grips, and so they're looking for other solutions that give them that type of control at a more cost-effective price point. The most exciting thing, and Eric and I have talked about this, it's completely analog. Do I have the part?
That's what makes it so cool.
It's in my pocket. It's like it's so small I can't even find it in my pocket. It's this system here. So this little guy, I'll have you hold that, Eric, for a second. So the name of this company is well, they're the Light Bridge, but this is called the Cine Reflect lighting system. And it's a series of different mirrors that have different types of diffusion on them, and they come in all different sizes. So this is the smallest size. You could think about that for tabletop work, little specials and things like that. You get to a size like this, and you bounce a Fresnel or a Leica off of this, and it blooms the light. It's soft. It's already diffused. And we talked about this. I mean, you could light this. This could be your key light, and we get a cowboy out of this.
Cowboy from that. That's like, waist to head. That's crazy.
And different coatings, you can see these are 2 of them here, and they have them in other sizes, smaller than this, larger than this. There's a large one with a yoke. The one that's the large yoke one isn't even that large, and you could bounce a light off of that, easily use it to light a scene with a good size room. I'm really excited. I mean, I'm going to get some of these to play with in a couple of weeks, and I really want to start to sort out how I'm going to use this tool. But I haven't been this excited about a lighting control product in a long time. So I think the Cine Reflect lighting system, that's probably, for me, number one. We
bounce a lot of light. We use white cards, we use the large Matthews expendables. That, bouncing light is not a new thing.
Nope.
And to take that to a whole new level of quality light, soft light with a hard light, and increasing the diameter of it, was like 70% reflective
up
quality,
to 97.
Up to 97,
yeah.
So quite amazing. Matt?
I always like the little tiny things. I think that make our, something that I use on a daily basis all the time that makes our lives easier. So I think for me, 2 are probably the standout things that I've seen at this show. I like the little wooden camera, push button, Arri rosette, because it's like one of those things where you think, why didn't somebody make this before? Simple concept. We're all holding onto cameras, we're using grips. There's nothing worse than having to take 2 hands or put it down to make an adjustment. You want to be able to just do that really easily. So something like that is really good. I also like the fact that a lot of the battery solutions now are getting smaller, more compact, because the regulations, as we all know, if you travel with batteries, are very strict. So getting those battery sizes down smaller, being more efficient, makes it a lot easier when you're traveling around, or even powering cameras. Some solutions that allow you to put multiple batteries onto one camera that take up the space of what a normal traditional, say, 150
You saw
battery
the core stuff? I mean, the core Switron, that stuff is pretty advanced. They even have a little app where you go in and you can put it up, and it'll basically communicate with your batteries and tell you what the battery level is, which battery it is. It has its own ID and everything. So it's getting really advanced. But
and everything runs off power, right? So it's an important thing. We shouldn't overlook it.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the fast charging that we're starting to see. So now we're starting to see newer battery solutions that are in these smaller form factors. You plug them in and you're at 80% capacity in an hour or so. That's pretty exciting too. Yeah.
Batteries and codecs. Ooh, that's sexy stuff.
And that little wooden camera thing that you're talking about. The little wooden camera thing. That's huge.
Yeah, actually, for me, it was just like a simple thing. It was made by 16:9. It's called a Cine Lock. Super basic. It's like a tiny little lock you can make, put your devices on your camera quickly and super secure. $99. And it's like $35 for extra mounts. It's a no-brainer, It's just fast and secure. I love that stuff. All right, guys, this was fun. I had a good time.
Yeah,
absolutely.
NAB 2018 was very cool. We, again, are at the AbelCine booth. If you're ever in Los Angeles or New York, make sure you go to AbelCine's stores. They have
Chicago.
Or Chicago. God, I can't forget
You
that.
forgot the Windy City.
They have everything. They have great showrooms. They do a lot of courses and training. So they definitely have a lot to help us all find the gear we want and also get some great training to learn how to use it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, go to newsshooter.com to check out all the great content from the show, as well as days after the show. We're always going to be having new content. So make sure to check out newsshooter.com for all the goodies that we all love to use. All right, well, that's it. I'm Eric Naso with newsshooter.com again. Thank you, Jeff, Jem, and Matt for joining us with this panel. It was a great discussion, and we'll see you at newsshooter.com. Take care. Thanks.